Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his face as he watched his cattle eat grass in the morning sun. The big black bull named Thunder stood under the old oak tree near the fence. Thunder was not like other bulls. He was calm and gentle. Jake had raised him from a baby calf 5 years ago. The 40 acres of land had been in Jake's family for 3 generations. His grandfather bought it back in 1952 when there was nothing around but farms and empty fields. His father raised cattle here too. Now it was Jake's turn to carry on the family business, but things had changed a lot in the past few years. Where there used to be open fields and dirt roads, now there were big houses with perfect lawns and clean sidewalks. The new neighborhood was called Willowbrook Estates. The houses were expensive and looked exactly alike. They had white fences, flower gardens, and driveways that never had oil stains. Jake's property sat right in the middle of all these new houses. His old wooden fences and metal gates looked very different from the neat suburban yards around him. His cattle barn was painted red, but the paint was old and faded. The smell of hay and animals drifted across the neighborhood when the wind blew from the west. The new neighbors were not happy about living next to a cattle ranch. They had bought their houses thinking they would live in a quiet suburb with clean air and no farm smells. Instead, they woke up every morning to the sound of cows mooing and the smell of the barnyard. At first, the complaints were small. A neighbor would call and ask Jake to keep his animals quieter in the early morning. Another would mention that the flies from the cattle were bothering their backyard barbecues. Jake tried to be a good neighbor. He moved the cattle to the far pasture during weekend parties. He cleaned the barn more often. He even built a better fence to keep his animals away from the property line. But the complaints kept coming. They got bigger and louder. Someone started a petition to get Jake's ranch shut down. They called it a public health hazard and said it was not suitable for a residential area. The petition got 50 signatures in 2 weeks. Jake knew the law was on his side. His property had been a working ranch long before any houses were built. The county had something called grandfather rights that protected farmers who were there first. No new law could force him to stop raising cattle on land his family had used for farming for 70 years. Still, the pressure was getting worse every month. The Homeowners Association, which everyone called the HOA, started sending him official letters. The letters came in white envelopes with fancy letterheads. They used big words and legal language that was hard to understand. The first letter was polite. It asked Jake to consider the impact of agricultural odors on property values in the community. It suggested he might want to explore options for relocating his operation to a more suitable location. Jake threw that letter in the trash. The second letter was less polite. It talked about nuisance issues and quality of life concerns. It mentioned that several residents had complained to the county health department about flies and smells. It asked Jake to attend a community meeting to discuss solutions. Jake did not go to the meeting. The third letter was not polite at all. It said Jake's ranch was negatively affecting the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. It claimed his cattle were creating unsanitary conditions and diminishing property values throughout the subdivision. Threatened to pursue all available legal remedies if Jake did not take immediate action to address these issues. Jake kept that letter. He showed it to his lawyer, Maria Santos, who had handled his family's legal matters for 10 years. Maria read the letter and laughed. "They can send you 100 letters like this," she told Jake. "It does not change anything. You have every right to raise cattle on your own land. They knew there was a ranch here when they bought their houses. If they did not want to live near cows, they should have looked somewhere else." But Jake could feel the pressure building. When he went to the feed store in town, people looked at him differently. Some of the new residents shopped at the same grocery store he had been using for 15 years. They would stare at him and whisper to each other. A few times someone made a comment about that cow smell when he walked by. The worst part was how they treated his animals. Jake loved his cattle like pets. He knew each cow by name and personality. Thunder, his prize bull, was especially special to him. Thunder was smart and curious. He would come when Jake called his name. He liked to have his head scratched behind the ears. But to the new neighbors, Thunder was just a big, scary animal that made noise and smelled bad. Kids riding their bikes past the fence would throw rocks at the cattle. Teenagers would honk their car horns to try to scare the animals. Someone even threw garbage over the fence into the pasture. Jake started spending more time watching over his animals. He put up security cameras near the road. He walked the fence line every morning and evening to check for damage. He found broken bottles, food wrappers, and even a few beer cans that had been thrown into his pasture. The stress was getting to Thunder, too. The big bull, who had always been calm and friendly, started acting nervous when cars drove by. He would move away from the road and stay closer to the barn. Sometimes Jake would find him standing in the far corner of the pasture, as if he was trying to hide from all the noise and activity. Jake's routine had not changed much over the years. He woke up at 5:30 every morning to feed the animals. He checked their water tanks and made sure the fences were secure. He spent his days maintaining the property, fixing equipment, and taking care of his cattle. In the evening, he would sit on his porch with a cold beer and watch Thunder and the other animals graze peacefully in the sunset. But now his peaceful routine was constantly interrupted. There were phone calls from the HOA. There were letters in his mailbox. There were complaints from neighbors about everything from the sound of his tractor to the flies that came from the barn. Jake tried to stay positive. This was his home and his life's work. His grandfather had started this ranch with nothing but determination and hard work. His father had expanded it and made it profitable. Jake had modernized the operation with better equipment and improved breeding programs. He was not going to let a bunch of city people who moved to the country force him to give up everything his family had built. The land was legally his. The cattle were his livelihood. Thunder and the other animals depended on him for their care and protection. Jake Martinez was a stubborn man, just like his father and grandfather before him. He had decided to fight for his right to live the way his family had always lived. He did not know that the real fight was just beginning, and that Thunder would soon become the most famous bull in the county. Derek Thompson adjusted his new uniform shirt and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. The white shirt had patches on both shoulders that said, Willowbrook Estates Community Standards Enforcement Officer. The title was long, but Derek liked how important it sounded. He had been working this job for only 3 weeks, but he already felt like the most important person in the neighborhood. After 2 years of working security at the Westfield shopping mall, this new position felt like a real step up in his career. Derek was 28 years old and lived in a small apartment on the other side of town. He had always wanted to have authority and make people follow rules. At the mall, he could only ask teenagers to stop skateboarding and tell people not to loiter. But this new job was different. He had real power to write citations and force people to fix problems with their properties. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had hired Derek after the previous enforcement officer quit. That man had been old and tired. He would drive around the neighborhood once a week and mostly ignore small violations. He never wanted to confront people or write many citations. The HOA board members wanted someone younger and more aggressive. They wanted someone who would take the job seriously and make sure every resident followed all the community rules. Derek had convinced them during his interview that he was exactly the right person for this job. I believe in order and standards, Derek had told the 5 board members sitting around the conference table. A community is only as good as its weakest property. If you let one person break the rules, soon everyone will think they can do whatever they want. The board members had nodded and smiled. They liked Derek's attitude. They offered him the job the next day. Derek's new truck was his favorite part of the job. The HOA had given him a white Ford pickup with magnetic signs on both doors. The signs had the neighborhood logo and his official title. He also had a clipboard, a camera, and a book full of citation forms. Every morning, Derek would drive slowly through all the streets in Willowbrook Estates. He looked for violations of the community standards. Grass that was too long, paint that was peeling, garbage cans left out too long after pickup day, cars parked in the wrong places. Any little thing that did not match the perfect image the HOA wanted to maintain. In his first 3 weeks, Derek had written 47 citations. He was proud of this number. The previous enforcement officer had written only 12 citations in his last 3 months on the job. Derek kept a notebook where he wrote down every violation he found. He took pictures of everything. He measured grass with a ruler to make sure it was not longer than 3 inches. He used a color chart to check if house paint matched the approved colors list. The residents were starting to know Derek by sight. Some people would wave when he drove by. Others would quickly go inside their houses when they saw his white truck coming down their street. A few had already complained to the HOA board that Derek was being too strict and finding problems that did not really matter. But Derek did not care what the residents thought. He had a job to do, and he was going to do it better than anyone else ever had. The biggest problem in the neighborhood, according to Derek, was the cattle ranch in the middle of all the nice houses. Every morning when he started his patrol, he could smell the cows and see the ugly old barn. It bothered him that something so messy and smelly was allowed to exist in such a beautiful community. Derek had driven past Jake's property many times in his first few weeks. He had taken dozens of pictures of the ranch. He measured the height of the fences. He looked for any possible violation of county codes or community standards. The problem was that Jake's ranch was not technically part of the Willowbrook Estates community. The land had been there long before the subdivision was built. Derek's authority as an HOA enforcement officer did not extend to Jake's property. This fact made Derek very frustrated. He could write citations for residents who had weeds in their flower beds or mailboxes that needed paint. But he could not do anything about the cattle ranch that was clearly the biggest problem in the entire area. Derek spent hours reading through county codes and zoning laws. He looked for any possible way to force Jake to clean up his property or move his cattle somewhere else. He called the county health department to ask about regulations for livestock operations. He contacted the zoning office to see if there were any violations he could report. But every phone call gave him the same answer. Jake's ranch was completely legal. He had all the proper permits and licenses. His operation met all the health and safety requirements. His property had been grandfathered in when the residential zoning was changed for the surrounding area. Derek did not understand why the law protected someone who was clearly ruining the neighborhood for everyone else. It seemed unfair that one person could negatively impact the property values and quality of life for hundreds of families. He started driving by Jake's ranch several times every day. He would park his truck on the public road and take pictures. He hoped to catch Jake doing something wrong that he could report to the county authorities. Derek noticed that the cattle often came close to the fence line along the road. The big black bull was usually there in the mornings and afternoons. Derek thought the bull looked mean and dangerous. He wondered if it was safe for such a large animal to be so close to where children rode their bicycles and people walked their dogs. He took pictures of Thunder standing near the fence and sent them to the county animal control office. He wrote a report claiming that the bull appeared aggressive and posed a potential public safety risk. The animal control officer came out to investigate but found no problems. Thunder was calm and friendly when the official visited. Derek also tried to find fence violations. He measured the distance between Jake's fence posts. He checked the height of the wire fencing. He looked for any gaps or damaged sections that might violate county codes. But Jake maintained his fences properly and everything met the legal requirements. The more Derek investigated, the more frustrated he became. Jake seemed to be following all the rules, even though his ranch was obviously a problem for the community. Derek started to take Jake's compliance with the law as a personal challenge. He began keeping detailed notes about everything that happened at the ranch. What time Jake fed the animals, how often he cleaned the barn, when the cattle were moved from one pasture to another. Derek hoped that if he watched long enough, he would eventually catch Jake making a mistake he could report. Some of the Willowbrook Estates residents started calling Derek their hero for trying to deal with the cattle ranch problem. They would stop him during his daily patrols and thank him for working so hard to protect their community. This praise made Derek feel even more determined to find a way to force Jake to change his operation or leave. Derek's supervisor at the HOA was pleased with his aggressive approach to enforcement. The board members liked seeing someone who took the job seriously and worked hard to maintain community standards. They gave Derek a small raise after his first month and told him to keep up the good work. But Derek wanted to do more than just write citations for long grass and wrong paint colors. He wanted to solve the biggest problem in the neighborhood. He wanted to be the person who finally got rid of the smelly cattle ranch that was ruining everything. For the nice families who had paid good money to live in a clean, quiet suburban community. Derek did not realize that his obsession with Jake's ranch was about to lead him into serious trouble. He was so focused on finding violations that he was starting to cross legal boundaries. His daily visits to photograph Jake's property were beginning to look more like harassment than legitimate enforcement activity. Jake had started to notice the white truck that drove by several times every day. He had seen Derek taking pictures and making notes. Jake was getting tired of being watched and documented like he was some kind of criminal. The tension between Derek and Jake was building slowly but steadily. Neither man knew that their conflict was about to explode in a way that would shock the entire community and make Thunder the most famous bull in the county. The Tuesday morning started like any other day for Jake Martinez. He woke up at 5:30 and put on his work clothes. The summer heat was already building, and he knew it would be another scorching day. The weather forecast said it would reach 98 degrees by afternoon. Jake walked out to the barn and filled the water troughs for his cattle. The animals were still resting in the shade, but they would need plenty of fresh water as the day got hotter. Thunder, his big black bull, was lying under the old oak tree near the road fence. The tree was the coolest spot on the entire property during hot weather. After feeding the cattle, Jake went back to the house for breakfast and coffee. He had plans to drive into town later that morning to buy feed supplies at Henderson's farm store. The store was having a sale on hay and grain that would save him almost $200 if he bought enough to last. Through the end of summer, Jake did not know that Derek Thompson was already parked on Maple Ridge Drive, watching the ranch through binoculars. Derek had arrived at 6:30 and positioned his white truck where he could see most of Jake's property. He had his camera ready and his citation book open on the dashboard. Derek was more determined than ever to find something wrong with Jake's operation. The night before, he had received another complaint call from Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the house closest to the ranch. She had called to complain about flies and smell during her dinner party on Sunday evening. "That man and his disgusting animals ruined my entire gathering," Mrs. Henderson had told Derek over the phone. "My guests were so uncomfortable they left early. Something has to be done about this situation." Derek had promised Mrs. Henderson that he would increase his surveillance of the ranch and look for any possible violations. He was frustrated that all his previous attempts to find problems had failed, but he was not ready to give up. As the morning progressed, the temperature climbed quickly. By 9 o'clock, it was already 85 degrees and very humid. Thunder moved deeper under the shade of the oak tree, but he was still clearly visible from the road. Derek had been sitting in his truck for almost 3 hours, sweating in the heat and getting more annoyed by the minute. He had taken dozens of pictures but found nothing he could cite as a violation. The cattle were all properly contained within the fenced area. The barn looked clean and well-maintained. Even the manure pile was located in the proper place according to county regulations. At 10:30, Jake came out of his house wearing a clean shirt and his good baseball cap. He walked to his pickup truck and started the engine. Derek watched through his binoculars as Jake backed out of his driveway and headed toward town. This was exactly what Derek had been waiting for. With Jake gone, Derek could get closer to the fence line and take better pictures. He could also observe the cattle without Jake watching him from the house windows. Derek started his truck and drove slowly along the fence line until he found a good spot to park. He was on the public road, so he was not technically trespassing on Jake's property, but he was definitely closer than he had ever been before. Thunder was still lying under the oak tree, about 50 feet away from where Derek parked. The big bull was resting peacefully, occasionally swishing his tail to chase away flies. A few cows were grazing nearby, but most of the cattle had moved to shady areas to escape the increasing heat. Derek got out of his truck and walked to the fence with his camera. He wanted to get clear pictures that would show exactly how close the cattle came to the public road. He hoped to argue that having such large animals so near to where people walked and children rode bicycles was a safety hazard. Thunder noticed Derek immediately, but did not seem concerned. The bull had seen people taking pictures before. Jake often had visitors who wanted to see the cattle, and Thunder was used to cameras and strangers. Derek took several pictures of Thunder and the other cattle. He measured the distance from the fence to the road with a tape measure. He even collected some grass samples from near the fence line, thinking he might be able to claim that cattle waste was contaminating the public right-of-way. But nothing Derek found was actually a violation of any law or regulation. Jake's fences were the proper height and distance from the road. The cattle were contained within their designated area. There was no waste or debris on public property. Derek was getting frustrated again. He had been investigating this ranch for weeks and had found absolutely nothing wrong. It seemed impossible that such an obviously problematic operation could be completely legal and properly maintained. By 11:30, the temperature had reached 92 degrees. Derek was sweating heavily in his uniform shirt. His white truck felt like an oven inside, even with the air conditioning running. The humidity was making everything feel even hotter and more uncomfortable. Thunder had also noticed the heat. The big bull stood up and moved around under the tree, trying to find the coolest spot. He was panting slightly and looked uncomfortable in the extreme weather. Derek decided to try a different approach. Instead of just taking pictures from a distance, he would try to get the cattle to move so he could photograph them from different angles. If he could get Thunder to stand up and walk around, he might be able to get pictures that made the bull look more intimidating or aggressive. Derek walked back to his truck and reached for the horn. He pressed it once briefly to see how the cattle would react. Thunder lifted his head and looked toward the sound. A few of the cows also looked up from their grazing, but none of the animals seemed particularly bothered by the noise. Derek pressed the horn again, this time for a longer blast. Thunder stood up and took a few steps, looking around to see where the noise was coming from. Derek quickly took pictures of the bull in a standing position. Encouraged by this response, Derek honked the horn several more times. Each blast was longer and louder than the last. Thunder was now clearly agitated by the noise. The bull started pacing back and forth under the tree, snorting and shaking his head. The other cattle were also becoming upset. They began moving away from the fence line, heading toward the barn and the far pasture. But Thunder did not retreat. Instead, he moved closer to the fence, trying to locate the source of the disturbing sound. Derek was pleased with the reaction he was getting. Finally, he was seeing the cattle behave in a way that looked potentially dangerous. He continued taking pictures while honking the horn repeatedly. Thunder was getting more agitated with each blast of the horn. The bull had never experienced anything like this before. In his 5 years of life, he had always been treated gently by humans. Jake never used loud noises or harsh methods to manage his cattle. The sound of the car horn was not just loud but also sharp and unnatural. It hurt Thunder's sensitive ears and triggered his defensive instincts. The bull began pawing the ground with his front hooves, a sign of serious agitation in cattle. Derek did not understand cattle behavior well enough to recognize the warning signs. He thought Thunder's reaction was perfect for his purposes. The pictures he was taking would show an aggressive-looking bull that appeared to be threatening people on the public road. Derek decided to get one more series of really good pictures. He pressed down on the horn and held it for a full 30 seconds, creating one long, continuous blast of noise. This was too much for Thunder to tolerate. The bull had reached his limit of patience with the harassment. His protective instincts fully activated, and he made a decision that would change everything. Thunder began charging toward the fence with all the speed and power his 1,800-pound body could generate. His head was lowered, his eyes were focused on Derek's white truck, and his determination was absolute. Derek saw the bull charging toward him and suddenly realized he had made a serious mistake. Thunder was not just posing for pictures anymore. The massive animal was coming straight at Derek with obvious intent to stop the source of the noise that had been torturing him for the past several minutes. The fence that separated Thunder from the road had been built to keep cattle in their pasture during normal circumstances. It was never designed to stop an enraged bull moving at full speed. Derek dropped his camera and ran toward his truck, but he was too late. Thunder hit the fence with tremendous force, and Derek was about to learn that you should never provoke an animal you cannot control. Thunder hit the fence like a freight train moving at full speed. The wooden fence posts, which had stood strong for 15 years, snapped like toothpicks under the impact of 1,800 pounds of angry bull. The metal wire fencing twisted and tore as Thunder burst through without slowing down. Derek had just reached his truck door when he heard the terrible sound of breaking wood and metal behind him. He turned around to see Thunder charging directly at him. Now free from the fence and moving faster than Derek had ever imagined such a large animal could move. Derek threw himself into his truck and slammed the door shut just as Thunder reached the vehicle. The bull lowered his massive head and crashed into the side of the white pickup with a sound like thunder. The impact was so powerful that it lifted the truck's wheels off the ground on one side. Derek felt like he was inside a tin can that someone was hitting with a giant hammer. The windows rattled, the metal bent, and the entire truck shook violently. Derek's clipboard flew across the cab and hit him in the face. His camera fell to the floor and broke into pieces, but Thunder was not finished. The bull backed up a few steps and charged again, this time hitting the truck even harder. The second impact cracked the passenger side window and left a huge dent in the door. Derek could see Thunder through the windshield, snorting and pawing the ground, preparing for another attack. Derek tried to start his truck, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the keys. The engine turned over but would not catch. He tried again, pumping the gas pedal desperately while Thunder prepared for a third charge. This time, Thunder aimed for the front of the truck. The bull's head connected with the bumper and grille with a crash that sounded like a car accident. The hood buckled upward, steam began pouring from the radiator, and all the lights on the dashboard started flashing. The impact of the third charge pushed the truck backward toward the irrigation ditch that ran along the side of Maple Ridge Drive. The ditch was about 4 feet deep and always had water in it from the sprinkler systems of the nearby houses. Derek finally got the engine started, but when he put the truck in drive, nothing happened. The transmission had been damaged in the collision, and the truck would not move forward. Derek tried reverse, but the truck only made grinding noises. Thunder was now standing directly in front of the truck, blocking any possible escape route. The bull was breathing heavily and still looked very angry. His eyes were focused on Derek through the windshield, and he showed no signs of calming down. Derek honked his horn again, hoping the sound would scare Thunder away. This was exactly the wrong thing to do. The horn was what had made Thunder angry in the first place, and the sound only made the bull more determined to stop the source of the noise. Thunder charged the front of the truck one more time. This final impact was the strongest yet. The bull's head hit the bumper so hard that the entire truck slid backward and sideways. The rear wheels went over the edge of the road and down into the irrigation ditch. Derek felt the truck tilting as the back end dropped into the water. The truck came to rest at a 45-degree angle with the rear bumper underwater and the front wheels still on the road. Derek was now sitting in a truck that was half in a ditch, completely disabled and surrounded by muddy water. Thunder stepped back and looked at his work. The white truck was no longer making the terrible honking sound. The source of the noise had been stopped. The bull snorted once more, shook his head and began walking calmly back toward his pasture. Derek sat in his tilted truck, too shocked to move. Water was starting to seep in through the damaged door seals. His phone had fallen into the water at the bottom of the ditch and was completely dead. His radio was not working because the antenna had been bent during the collision. Derek could not believe what had just happened to him. 15 minutes ago, he had been taking pictures and feeling confident about his investigation. Now he was sitting in a destroyed truck, half submerged in dirty water with no way to call for help. Thunder walked through the hole he had made in the fence and returned to the shade of the oak tree. The bull lay down in his favorite spot and began chewing cud as if nothing unusual had happened. The other cattle, who had scattered during the commotion, slowly returned to their grazing. Derek tried to open his truck door, but it was stuck. The frame had been bent during the collision, and the door would not budge. He tried rolling down the window, but the electric windows were not working either. The truck's electrical system had been damaged when the radiator broke. Derek was trapped inside his truck with no way out and no way to call for help. The water in the ditch was rising slightly as more irrigation systems turned on around the neighborhood. Derek could feel the truck settling deeper into the mud at the bottom of the ditch. About 10 minutes after the collision, Mrs. Patterson was walking her small dog along Maple Ridge Drive when she saw the white truck sitting at an angle in the ditch. At first, she thought someone had just driven into the water by accident, but when she got closer, she could see that the truck was badly damaged and there was someone inside. Mrs. Patterson called 911 on her cell phone and reported the accident. She told the dispatcher that there was a truck in the irrigation ditch and the driver appeared to be trapped inside. She did not mention anything about a bull because Thunder was now lying peacefully under his tree and looked completely harmless. The first emergency vehicle to arrive was a fire truck from the Westfield Fire Department. The firefighters had responded to many car accidents, but they had never seen damage quite like what they found on Derek's truck. The metal was bent and dented in ways that looked more like the truck had been attacked than crashed. Fire Captain Rodriguez walked around the damaged truck and tried to figure out what had happened. The front end was smashed, but there was no other vehicle involved. The truck was in the ditch, but the skid marks on the road did not match a normal accident pattern. What happened here? Captain Rodriguez asked Derek through the cracked window. Derek was too embarrassed to tell the truth. He did not want to admit that he had been harassing a bull and the animal had fought back. Instead, he mumbled something about losing control of the vehicle and sliding into the ditch. But Captain Rodriguez was experienced in accident investigation, and the evidence did not match Derek's story. The damage to the truck looked like impact damage from multiple collisions, not a simple slide into a ditch. The pattern of dents and the bent metal suggested that something had hit the truck repeatedly from different angles. By this time, several neighbors had gathered to watch the rescue operation. They were curious about what had happened and surprised to see Derek's official HOA truck destroyed in the ditch. Thunder was still resting under his oak tree, occasionally lifting his head to watch the activity on the road. To the casual observer, the bull looked completely peaceful and innocent. No one would have guessed that this calm animal had just single-handedly destroyed a pickup truck and put its driver in the hospital. The firefighters used hydraulic tools to pry open Derek's door and help him climb out of the damaged truck. Derek was shaken and bruised but not seriously injured. The paramedics checked him for broken bones and head injuries, but found only minor cuts and scrapes. Derek's truck, however, was completely totaled. The front end was smashed, the transmission was broken, the radiator was destroyed, and the frame was bent. The insurance adjuster would later estimate the damage at over $15,000. As Derek was being loaded into an ambulance for a trip to the hospital, he looked back at Thunder one more time. The big black bull was watching him calmly, as if to say, "I hope you learned your lesson about bothering animals with car horns." Derek had definitely learned a lesson, but it was not the lesson he expected when he started his investigation that morning. He had learned that some animals will fight back when they are pushed too far, and that bulls are much stronger than pickup trucks. The story of the bull that destroyed an HOA enforcement truck was about to become the most talked-about incident in the history of Willowbrook Estates. Jake Martinez was loading 50-pound bags of cattle feed into his pickup truck at Henderson's farm store when his cell phone rang. The caller ID showed his neighbor Tom Wilson's number. "Jake, you need to get home right now," Tom said, sounding very excited. "There are fire trucks and ambulances all over your road, and that HOA guy's truck is upside down in the ditch." Jake dropped the bag of feed he was carrying and ran to his truck. The drive from town back to his ranch normally took 15 minutes, but Jake made it in 10. As he turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, he could see flashing lights and emergency vehicles everywhere. There were 2 fire trucks, an ambulance, a sheriff's deputy car, and a tow truck all parked along the road near his property. At least 20 neighbors were standing around watching the activity. Jake had never seen so many people on his quiet road at one time. Jake parked his truck and ran toward the crowd of people. The first thing he noticed was Derek's white HOA enforcement truck sitting at a crazy angle in the irrigation ditch. The truck was badly damaged and looked like it had been hit by a train. "What happened here?" Jake asked Tom Wilson, who was standing with several other neighbors. "Nobody knows for sure," Tom replied. "That HOA guy was parked by your fence taking pictures like he always does. Then we heard a lot of crashing and banging sounds. When we came out to look, his truck was in the ditch and he was trapped inside." Jake looked toward his pasture and immediately saw the problem. There was a huge hole in his fence where the wooden posts had been broken and the wire was twisted and torn. Thunder was standing calmly under the oak tree, but Jake could tell from the bull's posture that he had been involved in whatever had happened. Jake walked over to Deputy Martinez, the sheriff's officer who was investigating the incident. Deputy Martinez was not related to Jake, but they knew each other from high school and had remained friendly over the years. "Hey, Jake," the deputy said, "looks like you had some excitement here today. Your fence is pretty torn up." "I can see that," Jake replied. "Is Derek okay? And what exactly happened?" "The driver's fine, just shaken up and bruised," Deputy Martinez explained. But his story about what happened doesn't make much sense. He claims he lost control of his truck and slid into the ditch, but the damage pattern doesn't match that explanation. Deputy Martinez walked Jake over to look at Derek's truck more closely. The front end was completely smashed in, and there were multiple large dents along both sides. The damage looked like the truck had been in several separate collisions, not just one accident. "Look at these dent patterns," the deputy said, pointing to the damaged metal. "These are impact marks from something hitting the truck repeatedly. And see how the metal is pushed inward? That means something big and heavy was hitting the truck from the outside." Jake looked at the damage and then looked back at Thunder. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in his mind. "Did anyone see what actually happened?" Jake asked. "That's the strange part," Deputy Martinez said. Mrs. Patterson found the truck in the ditch, but nobody saw the actual incident. Mr. Wilson heard crashing sounds from inside his house, but he didn't look outside until it was over. Jake walked over to examine his broken fence more carefully. The wooden posts had been snapped off cleanly, as if something very strong had hit them at full speed. The wire fencing was twisted and scattered across the ground. Jake had built this fence himself 5 years ago, and he knew how strong it was. Only one thing could have done this kind of damage to his fence. Thunder was the only animal on his property large and strong enough to break through wooden fence posts. But Thunder had never been aggressive or destructive before. Something must have made the bull extremely upset to cause him to break out of his pasture. Jake walked back to Deputy Martinez with his theory about what had really happened. "I think my bull broke through the fence and attacked Derek's truck," Jake said quietly, so the neighbors could not hear. "Your bull?" Deputy Martinez looked surprised. "Why would your bull attack a truck?" "Thunder is normally very gentle and calm," Jake explained. "But cattle can become aggressive if they feel threatened or if something scares them badly. Derek has been parking here every day for weeks, taking pictures and bothering my animals." Deputy Martinez made notes in his incident report as Jake talked. The deputy was beginning to understand that this was not a simple traffic accident. "So you think the driver did something that made your bull angry enough to break out and attack his truck?" the deputy asked. "That's the only explanation that makes sense," Jake said. "Thunder has never been aggressive toward people or vehicles before. But if Derek was honking his horn or making loud noises to try to get the cattle to move for his pictures, that could have set Thunder off." Deputy Martinez walked back to the ambulance where Derek was being treated by paramedics. Derek was sitting on a stretcher with bandages on several small cuts. He looked very pale and shaken. "Mr. Thompson," the deputy said, "I need to ask you some more specific questions about what happened here. Were you taking pictures of the cattle when the accident occurred?" Derek hesitated before answering. He knew that admitting he had been harassing the bull with his car horn would make him look bad, but he also realized that his original story about losing control of his truck did not match the evidence. "I was conducting an investigation of potential violations," Derek said carefully. "I was photographing the livestock area from the public road." "Did you use your vehicle's horn for any reason?" Deputy Martinez asked. Derek hesitated again. He could see that the deputy already suspected the truth. Several of the neighbors were close enough to hear the conversation, and Derek did not want to admit his mistake in front of so many people. "I may have honked the horn once or twice to get the animals to move so I could take better pictures," Derek admitted quietly. "How many times did you honk and for how long?" the deputy pressed. Derek realized he was in serious trouble. He had not just been in an accident. He had been harassing livestock and the animal had fought back. His actions had caused property damage to Jake's fence and had put himself in danger. "Maybe several times," Derek admitted. "I was trying to get photographs of the bull in different positions." Deputy Martinez made more notes and then walked back to talk with Jake. The deputy was now confident that he understood what had really happened. Thunder had been peacefully resting under his tree when Derek began honking the truck horn repeatedly. The loud, sharp sound had agitated the normally calm bull until Thunder decided to stop the source of the noise. The bull had charged through the fence and attacked Derek's truck until the honking stopped. "It looks like your bull was defending his territory," Deputy Martinez told Jake. "The driver admits he was using his horn to harass your livestock. Your bull responded to what he perceived as a threat." Jake felt both relief and concern. He was relieved that Thunder had not attacked anyone without cause, but he was concerned about the legal implications of having a bull that had broken out of his pasture and destroyed someone's vehicle. "Am I going to be in trouble for this?" Jake asked. "That depends on several factors," the deputy replied. "Your bull was on your own property when the harassment started. Mr. Thompson was engaging in behavior that could be considered animal harassment, and your fence was adequate for normal circumstances. It just wasn't built to contain an angry bull." By this time, word of the incident was spreading rapidly through the neighborhood. People were calling their friends and neighbors to tell them about the bull that had attacked an HOA truck. The story was getting more dramatic with each telling. Mrs. Henderson, who had complained about Jake's ranch many times, came running over to see what had happened. When she saw Derek's destroyed truck in the ditch, she was both shocked and secretly pleased that the HOA enforcement officer had finally gotten some comeuppance. Can't believe that bull actually attacked a truck, she said to her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. I knew those animals were dangerous. This proves that the ranch doesn't belong in our neighborhood. But other neighbors had a different reaction. Tom Wilson had lived next to Jake for 8 years and had never seen Thunder act aggressively toward anyone or anything. That bull is normally as gentle as a puppy, Tom told the growing crowd. If he broke out and attacked that truck, it's because the driver did something to make him mad. Animals don't just go crazy for no reason. Jake stood near his broken fence watching the tow truck prepare to pull Derek's destroyed vehicle out of the ditch. Thunder was still resting peacefully under the oak tree, seemingly unaware that he had become the most famous bull in the county. The aftermath of the incident was just beginning, and Jake had no idea how much his life was about to change. Deputy Martinez spent the next 2 hours at Jake's ranch investigating every detail of the incident. He measured the distance from where Derek's truck had been parked to the broken fence. He took photographs of the damage to both the truck and the fence. He interviewed every neighbor who had heard or seen anything related to the incident. The deputy also spent considerable time observing Thunder. The big black bull was lying peacefully under the oak tree, chewing cud and showing no signs of aggression. When Deputy Martinez walked close to the fence, Thunder looked up with mild curiosity but showed no threatening behavior. This animal doesn't look dangerous to me, the deputy told Jake. He seems very calm and well-behaved. Thunder has always been gentle, Jake replied. I raised him from a baby calf. He's never hurt anyone or caused any trouble before today. Derek must have really upset him with all that honking. Deputy Martinez interviewed several neighbors who had been at home during the incident. Mrs. Patterson, who walked her dog past Jake's property every day, told the deputy that she had never seen the bull act aggressively toward people or cars. That bull usually just lies under his tree, Mrs. Patterson said. Sometimes children stop to look at him through the fence and he just watches them peacefully. I've never seen him get excited about anything. Tom Wilson provided the most important testimony. He had been working in his garage when the incident occurred and had heard the entire sequence of events. I heard a car horn honking over and over again, Tom told the deputy. It went on for several minutes and it was really loud and annoying. Then I heard crashing sounds and breaking wood. When I came outside to see what was happening, the HOA truck was already in the ditch. The evidence was becoming very clear. Derek had used his car horn repeatedly to harass Thunder, and the bull had responded by breaking out of his pasture to stop the source of the noise. Derek's behavior had directly caused the incident. Deputy Martinez also discovered that Derek had been visiting Jake's property almost daily for several weeks. Several neighbors had seen Derek parked by the fence taking pictures and making notes. Some had even complained to the HOA that Derek was spending too much time bothering the cattle ranch. Instead of enforcing community standards, Mr. Thompson has been conducting what appears to be surveillance of your property, the deputy told Jake. Multiple witnesses have seen him parked here taking photographs on a regular basis. This incident was the result of an escalating pattern of harassment. By late afternoon, the tow truck had finally extracted Derek's destroyed vehicle from the irrigation ditch. The truck was so badly damaged that it had to be loaded onto a flatbed trailer. The tow truck driver, who had been working accident scenes for 20 years, had never seen a vehicle destroyed by a bull before. I've seen cars hit by deer and elk, the tow truck driver told Deputy Martinez, but I've never seen anything like this. That bull really did a number on this truck. Derek had been taken to the county hospital for observation, but his injuries were minor. He had several bruises and a few small cuts from broken glass, but no broken bones or serious wounds. The doctors wanted to keep him overnight for observation because he had hit his head during the incident. Jake was relieved that Derek had not been seriously injured. Despite all the harassment and trouble Derek had caused, Jake did not want anyone to get hurt. He was a peaceful man who believed in solving problems through communication, not violence. The incident had attracted attention from beyond the immediate neighborhood. By evening, news of the bull attack had spread throughout the county. People were calling friends and family members to tell them about the HOA enforcement officer who had been defeated by an angry bull. The local newspaper, the Westfield County Herald, sent a reporter to interview Jake and the neighbors. The reporter, Sarah Chen, had covered many local stories but had never written about a bull attacking a government vehicle. This is certainly an unusual incident, Sarah told Jake as she took notes. Can you tell me more about your bull's temperament and why you think he reacted so strongly to Mr. Thompson's presence? Jake explained Thunder's normally gentle nature and his theory about what had triggered the attack. He also told the reporter about the weeks of harassment he had endured from Derek and the HOA. Derek had been parking here almost every day, taking pictures and trying to find violations, Jake said. I think Thunder finally got tired of the constant disturbance and decided to do something about it. Sarah Chen interviewed several neighbors and found that opinions were divided about the incident. Some residents, particularly those who had complained about Jake's ranch, felt that the incident proved the cattle were dangerous and should be removed from the neighborhood. But other neighbors supported Jake and blamed Derek for provoking the attack. They felt that Derek had been overzealous in his enforcement duties and had brought the trouble on himself. That young man was obsessed with finding problems with Jake's ranch, Mrs. Patterson told the reporter. He was out here constantly bothering those poor animals. I'm not surprised one of them finally fought back. The story was becoming more complex as different perspectives emerged. What had started as a simple incident between a bull and an HOA officer was turning into a broader conflict about property rights, animal welfare, and the limits of community enforcement authority. Jake called his lawyer, Maria Santos, to discuss the legal implications of the incident. Maria had been handling Jake's family legal matters for years and was familiar with the ongoing conflict between Jake and the HOA. The good news is that the deputy's investigation supports your version of events, Maria told Jake over the phone. Mr. Thompson was harassing your livestock and your bull was defending his territory. You're not liable for damages caused by an animal protecting itself from harassment. Maria also explained that Derek could potentially face charges for animal harassment or disturbing the peace. Using a car horn repeatedly to agitate livestock could be considered a misdemeanor offense under county animal welfare laws. The HOA might also be liable for their employees' actions, Maria added. If Mr. Thompson was acting outside the scope of his authority when he harassed your bull, they could be responsible for the damages to their own vehicle. By the next morning, the story had grown beyond the local community. Someone had posted about the incident on social media, and it was being shared rapidly across various platforms. The story of the bull who defeated an HOA enforcement officer was resonating with people who had their own frustrations with homeowners associations and overzealous officials. Jake woke up to find his phone ringing constantly, with calls from reporters, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard about the incident. Thunder had become an overnight celebrity, and Jake was not sure how to handle all the attention. The incident had also reached the attention of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. The 5 board members called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation and decide how to respond to the public relations disaster their enforcement officer had created. Board President Robert Hayes was particularly concerned about the potential legal and financial implications of Derek's actions. The HOA's insurance company was already asking questions about why their employee had been harassing livestock instead of focusing on his assigned duties. This incident has made us look like bullies who pick on innocent farmers, Hayes told the other board members. We need to distance ourselves from Mr. Thompson's actions and find a way to repair our relationship with the community. The board members realized that Derek's obsessive pursuit of Jake's ranch had backfired spectacularly. Instead of finding violations they could use to pressure Jake into leaving, Derek had created a situation that made the HOA look unreasonable, and Jake look like a victim. Thunder, meanwhile, had returned to his normal routine. The big bull spent his day grazing peacefully and resting under the oak tree, unaware that he had become a folk hero to people across the county who admired his direct approach to dealing with bureaucratic harassment. Jake stood by his broken fence, watching Thunder and wondering what would happen next. The incident had changed everything, but Jake was not yet sure whether the changes would be good or bad for his family's ranch. 3 days after the incident, Derek Thompson found himself sitting in a lawyer's office facing the worst professional crisis of his life. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had fired him immediately after learning the full details of what had happened at Jake's ranch. Derek's meeting with HOA board president Robert Hayes had not gone well. Hayes had made it clear that Derek's actions were completely outside the scope of his employment and had created serious legal liability for the organization. You "We're hired to enforce community standards within our subdivision," Hayes had told Derek sternly. "You were never authorized to harass livestock or conduct surveillance of properties outside our jurisdiction. Your behavior has exposed us to potential lawsuits and made our organization look foolish." The HOA's insurance company was equally unhappy with Derek. They had initially assumed they would need to pay for Derek's medical expenses and vehicle repairs. But when they learned that Derek had caused the incident by harassing an animal, they began looking for ways to deny coverage. "Your policy clearly excludes coverage for damages caused by intentional acts or criminal behavior," the insurance adjuster told Hayes. "If Mr. Thompson was harassing livestock, that could be considered animal abuse, which would void our obligation to pay his claims." Derek was now facing the possibility of paying for his destroyed truck out of his own pocket. The vehicle was worth $15,000, money that Derek did not have. He was also worried about potential criminal charges for animal harassment. Derek's lawyer, Paul Mitchell, was not optimistic about his client's situation. "You admitted to the deputy that you were using your horn to harass the bull," Mitchell told Derek. "That admission, combined with witness testimony and the physical evidence, makes it very difficult to argue that you were not responsible for provoking the attack." Meanwhile, Jake was dealing with his own legal and practical challenges. Although Deputy Martinez had concluded that Thunder's actions were defensive rather than aggressive, Jake still needed to repair his broken fence and address concerns about public safety. Jake's insurance company had initially been worried about liability for the bull attack. But after reviewing the deputy's report and witness statements, they determined that Jake was not at fault for the incident. "Your bull was responding to harassment and defending his territory," Jake's insurance adjuster explained. "Under these circumstances, you're not liable for damages caused by the animal's defensive actions." Jake hired a fence contractor to repair the damage Thunder had caused. The new fence would be stronger than the original, with steel posts set in concrete rather than wooden posts. Jake wanted to make sure Thunder could not break out again, even if he was provoked by another harassment incident. The story of Thunder's attack on Derek's truck had continued to spread through social media and local news outlets. The Westfield County Herald had published Sarah Chen's article about the incident, and it had been picked up by several regional newspapers. The story resonated with many people who had their own frustrations with homeowners associations and overzealous enforcement officials. Thunder was being hailed as a hero who had stood up to bureaucratic bullying. Jake received dozens of phone calls and emails from supporters around the county. Many people wanted to visit his ranch to see the famous bull who had defeated the HOA enforcement officer. Some even offered to buy beef directly from Jake's operation. "I've been dealing with my own HOA problems for years," one caller told Jake. "Your bull did what the rest of us only dream about doing. He fought back and won." The incident had also attracted the attention of animal rights organizations. Several groups praised Thunder's actions as a natural response to harassment and criticized Derek's behavior as animal abuse. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a veterinarian and animal behavior expert, was quoted in the newspaper article supporting Thunder's actions. "Cattle are generally peaceful animals, but they will defend themselves when threatened," Dr. Walsh explained. "Using loud noises to deliberately agitate livestock is a form of harassment that can cause significant stress to the animals." This bull's response was completely predictable and justified. The legal consequences for Derek continued to mount. The county prosecutor's office was reviewing Deputy Martinez's report to determine whether criminal charges should be filed. Animal harassment was a misdemeanor offense that could result in fines and community service. Derek was also facing a civil lawsuit from Jake's insurance company, which was seeking reimbursement for the cost of fence repairs. Jake's lawyer, Maria Santos, was considering additional claims for harassment and emotional distress. Mr. Thompson's pattern of surveillance and harassment caused significant stress to both Jake and his animals, Maria explained to the local newspaper. "We're exploring all legal options to ensure this kind of behavior is not repeated." The Willowbrook Estates HOA was dealing with its own public relations nightmare. Many residents were embarrassed by Derek's actions and angry that the organization had hired someone who would harass a neighboring property owner. The HOA board called a special law meeting to address the incident and announce changes to their enforcement policies. Board President Robert Hayes issued a public apology to Jake and the broader community. The actions of our former employee were completely inappropriate and do not represent the values of our community, Hayes said in a prepared statement. We deeply regret the harassment that Mr. Martinez and his animals endured, and we are taking steps to ensure such incidents never happen again. The HOA also announced that they would be implementing new training requirements for any future enforcement officers. All enforcement activities would be limited to properties within the subdivision, and any interactions with neighboring properties would require board approval. Some residents were calling for the entire HOA board to resign over their poor hiring and supervision of Derek. A petition was circulating demanding new leadership and better oversight of community enforcement activities. Derek's personal life was also falling apart. He had been living paycheck to paycheck even when he was employed, and now he had no income and potentially large legal bills. His landlord had given him notice to move out of his apartment because he could no longer afford the rent. The incident had also made Derek unemployable in any security or enforcement capacity. News stories about the bull attack appeared whenever someone searched for Derek's name online, making it impossible for him to find similar work. Derek was beginning to realize that his obsession with Jake's ranch had destroyed his life. What had started as zealous enforcement of community standards had escalated into harassment that had cost him his job, his vehicle, and his reputation. 3 weeks after the incident, Derek made a decision that surprised everyone involved. He contacted Maria Santos and asked to arrange a meeting with Jake to offer a personal apology. I know I caused a lot of trouble for you and your animals, Derek told Jake when they met at Maria's office. I got carried away with my job and forgot that you have rights too. I'm sorry for all the harassment and problems I caused. Jake was surprised by Derek's apology, but appreciated the gesture. Despite everything Derek had done, Jake was not a vindictive person. He accepted the apology and agreed not to pursue additional civil litigation beyond insurance claims. I hope you learned something from all this, Jake told Derek. Animals deserve to be treated with respect, and so do the people who take care of them. The meeting between Jake and Derek was covered by the local newspaper and helped to bring some closure to the incident. Many people in the community were impressed that Jake had been willing to forgive Derek despite all the trouble he had caused. Thunder, meanwhile, had become a local celebrity. People would drive by Jake's ranch just to see the famous bull who had defeated the HOA enforcement truck. Jake had to put up signs asking visitors not to honk their horns or make loud noises that might disturb the animals. The incident had changed the dynamic between Jake's ranch and the surrounding neighborhood. Many residents who had previously complained about the cattle operation now supported Jake's right to continue farming. The HOA had stopped sending complaint letters, and the relationship between Jake and his neighbors had actually improved. Derek's legal troubles were not over, but the prosecutor had decided not to file criminal charges in exchange for Derek completing community service and attending animal welfare education classes. Derek would also be required to pay restitution for the fence repairs. The incident had taught everyone involved important lessons about respect, boundaries, and the consequences of harassment. Thunder had become a symbol of resistance to bullying and overreach, while Derek had learned that actions have consequences and that abusing authority can destroy a person's life and reputation. 6 months after Thunder's famous battle with Derek's truck, Jake Martinez stood by his newly reinforced fence, watching his cattle graze peacefully in the morning sun. The steel posts and heavy-duty wire fencing had cost him $3,000, but the investment had been worth every penny for his peace of mind. Thunder was lying in his favorite spot under the oak tree, looking exactly as calm and gentle as he had before becoming the most famous bull in Westfield County. The only difference was the steady stream of visitors who came by to see the legendary animal who had taken down an HOA enforcement truck. Jake had initially been annoyed by all the attention, but he soon realized that Thunder's fame was actually helping his business. People who came to see the famous bull often ended up buying beef from Jake's ranch. His direct sales to local customers had increased by 40% since the incident. I never thought having a celebrity bull would be good for business, Jake told his neighbor Tom Wilson as they watched a family take pictures of Thunder through the fence. But people seemed to like buying meat from the ranch with the bull who fought back against the HOA. The legal aftermath of the incident had finally been resolved. Derek Thompson had completed his community service and paid full restitution for the fence repairs. The county prosecutor had decided not to file criminal charges, but Derek's record would show the animal harassment incident for several years. Derek had eventually found work as a night security guard at a warehouse, a job that paid much less than his HOA position and had no authority over other people's lives. He had learned to keep his head down and avoid confrontations that might remind people of his embarrassing encounter with Thunder. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had undergone major changes following the incident. All 5 board members had resigned under pressure from residents who were embarrassed by Derek's actions. The new board had implemented strict policies, limiting enforcement activities to properties within the subdivision boundaries. The HOA had also issued a formal written apology to Jake and had promised never to interfere with his ranching operations again. They had even contributed money toward Jake's fence repairs as a gesture of goodwill. We learned an important lesson about respecting our neighbors and staying within our proper authority, the new HOA president, Linda Chen, had told the local newspaper. Mr. Martinez has every right to operate his ranch, and we support his continued success. The relationship between Jake's ranch and the surrounding neighborhood had completely transformed. Many residents who had previously complained about cattle odors and flies now spoke proudly of living near the ranch with the famous bull. Mrs. Patterson, who walked her dog past Jake's property every day, had become one of Thunder's biggest fans. She would often stop to talk to Jake about the bull's daily activities and would bring her grandchildren to see Thunder when they visited. That bull is a neighborhood hero, Mrs. Patterson would tell anyone who would listen. He stood up for himself and his family when someone was bullying them. We could all learn something from Thunder's example. The incident had also attracted positive attention to Jake's ranching operation from agricultural organizations and farming publications. Jake had been invited to speak at several conferences about dealing with urban encroachment on agricultural land. Many farmers face pressure from residential development. Jake had told an audience of ranchers and farmers. The key is to know your rights, maintain good relationships with reasonable neighbors, and sometimes let your animals handle the unreasonable ones. Thunder's story had been featured in several magazines and websites, making him something of a folk hero among people who felt oppressed by homeowners associations and overzealous bureaucrats. Jake had received letters from around the country from people sharing their own stories of HOA conflicts. Jake had even been approached by a publisher interested in having him write a book about the incident. The proposed title was, When Bulls Fight Back, A Rancher's Guide to Dealing with Suburban Bullies. The fame had brought some unexpected benefits beyond increased beef sales. A local feed company had approached Jake about featuring Thunder in their advertising campaign. A cable television show about unusual animal stories had filmed a segment about Thunder at the ranch. Jake had been careful to make sure that all the attention did not spoil Thunder or make him aggressive. The bull remained as gentle and calm as ever, seeming to enjoy the visitors and attention without becoming overly excited or territorial. Thunder is still the same peaceful bull he always was, Jake told a reporter from a farming magazine. He just proved that even the gentlest animals will defend themselves when they're pushed too far. The incident had also led to changes in how the county handled conflicts between agricultural properties and residential developments. The county planning department had created new guidelines for managing the interface between farms and subdivisions. Deputy Martinez, who had investigated the original incident, had been promoted to sergeant and now taught a training class for other officers about dealing with agricultural urban conflicts. The Thunder incident taught us that we need to look at the whole situation, not just the immediate damage, Sergeant Martinez explained to his trainees. Sometimes what looks like an animal attack is really an animal defending itself from harassment. Jake's lawyer, Maria Santos, had used the case as an example in several presentations about property rights and agricultural law. The case had established important precedents about the right of farmers to operate legally permitted agricultural activities without interference from neighboring developments. Derek Thompson's story had taken a very different path. After losing his HOA job and facing public humiliation, Derek had struggled with depression and financial problems. He had been forced to move back in with his parents and take whatever work he could find. The incident had taught Derek some hard lessons about the consequences of abusing authority and harassing others. He had enrolled in anger management classes and had begun volunteering at an animal shelter as part of his effort to make amends for his behavior toward Thunder. I let my job go to my head and forgot that other people have rights too, Derek had admitted during one of his community service sessions. I thought I could push around a farmer and his animals, but I learned that sometimes the animals push back. Derek had also written a letter of apology to Jake that was published in the local newspaper. In the letter, Derek acknowledged that his actions had been wrong and expressed admiration for Jake's willingness to forgive him. Mr. Martinez showed me more kindness than I deserved, Derek wrote. He could have pursued criminal charges or sued me for everything I had, but he chose forgiveness instead. I hope someday I can be as generous as he was. The story of Thunder and Derek had become a local legend that was told and retold throughout the county. Children would ask their parents to drive by Jake's ranch so they could see the famous bull. Local businesses had created Thunder-themed merchandise, including t-shirts and coffee mugs. Jake had even commissioned a local artist to create a bronze statue of Thunder that would be placed in the town square. The statue would commemorate not just Thunder's famous victory, but also the importance of standing up for one's rights and treating others with respect. 1 year after the incident, Jake threw a party at his ranch to celebrate the anniversary of Thunder's victory over the HOA truck. Hundreds of people attended, including many of his former critics who had become supporters. Thunder seemed to enjoy being the center of attention at his own party. The big bull accepted scratches behind the ears from visitors and posed patiently for countless photographs. He had learned to recognize the sound of car engines and would often walk over to the fence when visitors arrived. Thunder taught all of us an important lesson, Jake said in a speech to the party guests. He showed us that even the most peaceful creatures will defend themselves when they're pushed too far. He also showed us that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to stand your ground and fight back. As the sun set on the anniversary celebration, Jake stood by Thunder's oak tree and reflected on how much his life had changed. What had started as a harassment incident had turned into a victory for farmers' rights and a lesson about the importance of treating others with respect. Thunder continued to graze peacefully, unaware that he had become a symbol of resistance to bullying and overreach. The gentle bull who had never hurt anyone, until he was pushed too far, had shown an entire community that sometimes fighting back is the only way to make bullies understand that their behavior will not be tolerated. Jake patted Thunder's head and smiled. "Good job, old friend," he said softly. "You stood up for all of us and you won." Thunder looked up at Jake with his calm, intelligent eyes as if he understood exactly what his human friend was saying. Then he returned to his grazing, content in the knowledge that his home was safe and his family was protected. The legend of Thunder the Bull would be told for generations in Westfield County, reminding people that even the gentlest creatures have limits, and that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them know that their behavior has consequences. Jake Martinez and his famous bull had proven that with determination, legal knowledge,